Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Caffeine for the Soul. And if you enjoy these podcasts, please do check out our free basic course in the Inside Out Understanding at michaelneill.org. Now, this is part 2 of a two-part series called Living from Wisdom, and I am aware that in part 1 I didn't mention the word wisdom, so let's start there today. Wisdom is one of those notions in the Inside Out Understanding that I share, in the 3 principles understanding that is at the heart of what I teach, that is considered like a fundamental tenet. So the Scottish mystic Sid Banks would talk about that we have innate mental health and we have innate wisdom. And the innate mental health bit, I got really deeply when I first heard Sid say, every human being is sitting in the middle of mental health. They just don't know it. My entire life changed because I realized it was true. But when he would talk about innate wisdom, I didn't get that bit. It sounded really cool that, oh, okay, so I have an innate wisdom inside me, but, well, how do I access it? And how do I know if it's wisdom that I'm listening to or something else? And it became, I had a lot of thinking about it. And so it was very hard for me to make sense of it. And over the years, I've made different distinctions, and I've learned things. I've even taught about it. And I've certainly had lots of moments where I was able to access this thing, and it was like, well, maybe this is innate wisdom. And it was only in the last month that I was chatting with one of my mentors, and I said to her, I'm still in my head about this innate wisdom thing. What would you say wisdom is? And she paused for a second, and then she said, I would say wisdom is a way of talking about where our really, really helpful thoughts come from. And there was a simplicity to that I was like, is that it? But it did something for me, because suddenly, instead of seeing wisdom as this mystical power that human beings had that I knew nothing about, I realized, oh, I get helpful thoughts, and even really helpful thoughts, all the time. So last episode, we talked about the difference between thoughts and thinking, that when we try to think about stuff, we tend to get bogged down. But if we make space for thoughts to come in, well, it almost seems like that's the way the mind is designed to be used. Well, if we put these two ideas together, that wisdom is where really, really helpful thoughts come from, and the mind is designed for thoughts to come in, we kind of get this formula for living from wisdom, which is make space for thoughts to come in, and some of them will be really, really helpful. And how do you make space for thoughts to come in? By not thinking about stuff all day long. So here's how it has played out for me. When I kind of started to see it this way, I started to realize that when I teach from wisdom. In other words, I show up and respond to what comes. I show up and engage with a person or an audience or a microphone or a video camera, and I let thoughts come to mind. I don't think about what I'm going to say. I don't think about what I'm saying. I let thoughts come to mind, and if they're good ones, if they feel helpful, I give them access to my mouth. And if they don't feel helpful, I let them pass. And it's very simple. I show up, I open my mouth, and good stuff tends to come. But it never occurred to me that was coming from wisdom. I just thought it was some magical thing that happened. And then I started to notice, well, of course it's the same thing that people mean when they talk about our innate wisdom, our deeper wisdom. that, like, where else is this stuff coming from? We could say it comes from the deeper mind, or it comes from beyond us, or it comes from, I don't know where it comes from, but calling that place wisdom works as well as anything else I've got. But what I also then realized is I've limited my use of that capacity to when I teach and when I coach. In other words, that's not how I traditionally relate to my wife. That's not traditionally how I take on things in my business, because their thinking matters, and it's helpful to think about stuff, and you don't want to not think about it, because if you think about it, and of course the real effect of all that thinking is just everything gets heavy. It gets bogged down. The more you think about stuff, the more stuff starts to matter, the weightier it becomes, until it feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. And it kind of is, because the weight of the world is actually the weight of all your thinking about the world. And that lives inside your head, which lives on top of your shoulders. So what do you do instead? Well, if you want to live from wisdom, it really is as simple as notice when you're thinking about stuff, when you're in your head trying to work it all out, and there's generally a kind of a scrunchy facedness to it. Most people, it kind of everything starts looking really important and really serious. And just stop as best you can and listen instead. Because one of the interesting things is we can't really listen and think at the same time. And if you listen, you'll start to hear thoughts come to mind. And they're often quieter. They come, there's a Shakespeare line I'm going to butcher, but they come as single spies, not in groups. And you'll just have a thought come to mind. And then there'll be another thought. And another thought. And you'll start to notice that without you doing anything, all these thoughts come to mind, and that the more space you create, the easier it is to discern which of those thoughts are worth listening to, which of those thoughts are really, really helpful, which of those thoughts are wisdom in action. And you start to follow them. You start to live from them. And it's true in any area. You can ask yourself a question like, how do I make more money in my business? How can I have a better relationship with my kids or with my partner? How can I make more of a difference in the world? How can I be happier in myself? And instead of trying to figure it out or go listen to somebody else tell you the answers, just listen. And you'll notice it doesn't stay quiet for long. If you don't get caught up in thinking about how maybe you don't have wisdom and surely you should have thought something by now and blah, 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 what will happen is you'll have a thought about it. And then another thought will come. And then another. And then another. And you'll start to notice that some of those thoughts are really helpful to you. And those are the ones you can act on. Those are the ones you can work with. Those are the ones you can use. And you start to see that you can do that anywhere, with anything. You can show up and respond to what shows up. You can show up, listen for wisdom, and see what comes. And I think if you take it on as an experiment, you'll be pretty delighted and maybe even pretty surprised by how much good stuff comes to mind. Have fun, learn heaps, happy exploring, and I'll talk with you soon.